Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Human Rights Campaign, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on the website womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by 19,970 people from 140 countries. It's supported also by 375 organisations. As well as signatories, we have country contacts in 52 countries who are engaged in defending women's rights in their countries. If you'd like to get involved, go to womensdeclaration.com and fill in the form or email us explaining you'd like to get involved. This week, I'm really pleased to say we have Claudine from the UK. She's going to talk to us about what's happening in the UK Green Party. We have Eleanor Scott from Wales. She's going to talk to us about how a Welsh institution's implementing gender ideology without debate or policy change, just behind our backs, just de facto implementation, and a couple of other things. Then we will hear from Marian Rutigliano from the USA, who came of age and grew up during the early days of the second wave radical feminism. And she's going to tell us about how radical feminist analysis helps us understand the world and her experience as a young lesbian in New York City. So that will be great. And then finally, we have Marie-Josephe de Villiers. She's from France. She's vice president of CQFD, Lesbian Feminists, and also of ICASM, the International Coalition for the Abolition of Surrogate Motherhood. And she's also a member of NOUES, WHRC France. And she'll be telling us about what's happening in France and other news from there. I'm really pleased now to hand over to Clarice, who's going to tell us about what's happening in the UK Green Party. So over to you, Clarice. Right, I'm really sorry, it's not Clarice, it's Claudine. Sorry, I'm so sorry, because Clarice is also here helping with tech.
I am, a human rights and Indigenous people's rights campaigner or activist. I'm holding space currently and agitating in the Green Party of England and Wales, and that's my Twitter account. So I think what's more important, really, what's the organizational structure of the Green Party? The Green Party is what we call Green Party of England and Wales. It's officially sort of known as Green Party. It's sadly very badly organized, and like other parties, was actually subject to sort of infiltration by gender ideology activists that have actually taken quite a lot of position within the party and sort of really diverted it from the initial concepts of actually really a climate organization that actually would be agitating politically to try and actually gain trajectory for climate issues. Why is this so important? Because what's happening now, a number of gender ideology activists have actually managed to gain positions within the party, and really they use any means possible to try and actually get rid of the opposition. They've silenced women. There are a lot of women that actually have been removed from the party, despite the processes that are meant to be there to actually, protect everybody and actually be fair, but those processes have not been fair. What has also happened is that the weaponizing of our disciplinary system has actually been so immense in the party, has actually caused loads of problems. So it is bad because most members do not know what's actually happening. So we have an opportunity as women in your local areas to actually think very long and hard about how do you actually engage and start thinking around grassroots campaigning for women sex-based rights. So this is available on the Green Party website. Generally, what you actually have as a proposal for the changes in the Green Party. But what we have actually 2 conferences a year, as other parties would have. We have Standing Orders Committee, which actually really interprets our constitution. We have a council, or what we call GPEX, what we actually call, in a sense, is our executive that actually runs the day-to-day running of the party. And then we have the staff team that are actually employed by the party, which actually make up quite a lot of a huge percentage. About 60 people actually make the members that are actually paid. So why is this important? Why am I showing you? Why am I showing you this? It is important because if you don't understand any structure of any party, when you join, you would be not aware what's actually happening in that party. So it is actually quite key and important to actually keep yourself knowledgeable of the changes that are happening. We have our own issues, in particular with the gender ideology. So what's actually happening at the moment? What's happening at the moment? We actually have a leadership election, which is important. So what actually happened? Within the year of the term, Jonathan Buckley stood down as co-leader in June. This actually triggered what we call a by-election within the party. So their job share, Sian Berry had to actually stand down until the by-election. So there's a big letter that she actually put down that actually really just cites transphobia within the party as a reason for her resignation. And she also specifically targeted one of the spokesperson in this regard. So it is quite key to be aware of this very issue that Sian Berry was actually sort of referring to, because this is the issue that created the biggest problem within the party. So just looking at the previous leadership election in 2020, the turnout is very low. And these are the problems that we always have within parties, the turnout very low. Active members within the parties, although we have 50,000 plus members, turnout is always very low on election. So any part of the party that can actually mobilize their members would always actually get the positions in any other positions. So it's actually very important for people to really be aware of this. If you're joining the party, if you're thinking you can make a difference in political parties, please join in, become active, so that then you will really stem the huge turnout of problems within parties. So the resignation letter, please go and look at it. I'll actually just post this in the chat later. So go and look at the resignation letter, because it really cites transphobia as a reason for her standing down. So it is actually quite important. It's a public knowledge. It's not something that I'm actually making up myself. So who are the contenders? Because I think it's actually quite important to really outline what's actually happening currently. I think someone that's actually standing out, standing on the basis of sex-based rights, and has been consistently throughout, not only his previous standing for the leadership election, the previous one, is Shara Ali. Shara has been outstanding in standing for women. He has, in most of his dealings, really been a passionate supporter of women's based rights. And in his actions, most people actually talk about, protecting women's rights. They only talk about it. They don't actually do the actions that actually supports that. But he's been actively doing that within the party, agitating, obviously getting really negative feedback and pushback from, the gender ideology, cabal, I call them, but accusing him of everything else to try and actually get rid of him. So it's actually been interesting. So really, if you are in the Green Party, please vote Shara Ali as your first preference, because it's only one person that actually stand up for the rights of women and actively doing so. So the next choice would be Martin Hemingway and Tina Rothery. So it is important that they are not, I would say, not gender critical per se, but they are people that actually have been in the party for a long time, and they just stand on the values of the party. So they would be the next possible people that actually can stand. And now my advice would be, then you actually ask for a reopen of nominations. But the other candidates is Adrian, Carla, and another Adrian, Amelia, and Tasmin. So you have seen, I mean, I'm not sure how many people have seen the link. So this is the leadership election where Shara was presenting her case and Amelia was actually shouting him down. It's absolutely interesting to actually really see the women that are saying standing for women's rights, but they do exactly the opposite to actually support their side. It's actually quite disheartening to see, especially in a party that actually should be standing for equal rights with very big philosophical basis. That actually why I joined the Green Party. I wasn't a member of any other party, but I joined because of those big philosophical bases that actually protected all rights and regarding everybody as the same. So clearly this is not the case within the party at present. So it is, I think for me, it's something that's actually been very important to actually highlight and see. So just actually going back to my slide. So the important thing really, and I've actually also put a Wikipedia link, which actually is very detailed because it goes through what Shara has been put through. So they've actually tried to smear him with anti-Semitism. They've tried to actually use the complaint system to get rid of him. He's now currently a spokesperson. They've tried to actually stop him from being a spokesperson for the Green Party. So they've used all manner of methods to try and actually detract everybody from actually supporting him at all. So, and they have been in their venom, they're actually also being racist, what I would regard as actually racist, but because they actually stand for kind of trans rights, appears as if actually nobody actually recognizes their racism against Shara Ali. So it is really quite an awful thing to actually observe as someone from the party who is actually within the Green Party. But the other issues that he's actually raised very strongly is the position of Stonewall's diversity scheme that most parties are actually a party for. Most government departments continue to actually be a party for, despite Stonewall actually misinterpreting the law or, gainfully to try and actually push a certain idea. So where there is meant to be sex, they're actually using gender and all other things that have actually tried to actually, detract from other issues, in particular on women's rights. Why am I talking about human rights? These are fundamental rights. No human right is greater than the other. So it is important for women to actually really make this their Bible, because that's the only thing that you can actually fight against the tyranny that's actually happening. So it's so important for us to organize in parties, if we are in parties. If you're not in parties, if you feel very strongly, please do think about actually joining parties, because this is where all the decisions are made, the policies are made, where bills are brought in by different party MPs. You can actually bring a private member's bill and they get lobbied quite a lot. So we have to actively lobby our own MPs. We have to lobby our own councillors in our local areas. We have to actually find out what's happening around sex-based rights. We have to actually get FIOs in these areas and actually really drill down on what's happening, because the other side would use nefarious ways. They would use the Denton's way of actually sort of, putting popular policies with their policies in. So they don't actually want us to deviate them, but women are rising. It's encouraging. So we're all actually getting in our local areas now that we actually allowed to be outside, and really we are agitating. So everybody has to actually support us when we agitate. So we need to also really support women that are agitating. I'm disappointed with what's happened to Marsha. wishing her all the best. Rosie Duffy, constantly standing up for women's sex-based rights. It is important to actually support those women. So let's support them and make sure that they are really feeling supported, because the other side support their own. And thank you very much.
Eleanor's from Wales. She's going to talk about Welsh institutions implementing gender ideology. And thank you so much for coming, Eleanor, and over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to add that I did actually join the Green Party, and I have actually voted for Ali for precisely all the reasons that Claudine has mentioned. Today I'm going to talk about, sorry, I'm going to be reading from my hymn sheet, guys, so I'll be looking down. I'm going to be talking about the Welsh Government's intention to implement an LGBTQ+ action plan, which, rather like self-ID in Scotland and what was unsuccessfully pushed in England, it attempts to enshrine the concept of gender identity in policy and therefore law. It's quite a comprehensive document, so I'm just going to concentrate today on the human rights section of the proposal and how it relates to sex-based rights and protected characteristics, and whether it's, as an action plan, it's even lawful. This issue has been covered previously on these webinars by Marie-Josephe and the LGB Alliance Cymru, and they are very much active in working to can the plan, as they call it. But with a deadline looming and an apparent impasse when it comes to listening to opposing views, we're once again in a position where we need voices, as many as possible, to get involved. This has been quietly stewing away from public scrutiny in particular, and it's interesting to me, as somebody who's been aware of this issue for a few years now, that I had no idea our government was attempting to bring this in by stealth until relatively recently. The drafting of the plan was effectively outsourced to Stonewall Cymru, and the expert panel, in quotes, that was consulted was drawn exclusively from supporters of gender ideology, making the process entirely partisan. Organisations trying to provide input for women, LGBT and religious interests have discovered that Stonewall yet again dictates the policy and find themselves locked out of the process. They've been knocking on the government's door, both literally and figuratively, yet they've all been brushed off or ignored. Why is this? Well, likely because the plan is legally flawed and attempting to circumvent both the Equality Act and human rights laws. As a fellow signatory with a greater legal mind than me has pointed out, it is arguable that the process is tainted from the beginning, because any policy change that may affect the activities of those in another protected class requires that class to be consulted. For example, in section 149 of the Equality Act, it states the need to advance equality of opportunity between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not. So that if any time you are trying to advance any one equality of opportunity, you have to check every other protected characteristic and whether there's going to be any impacts on those other parties. So therefore, you have to have due regard, in particular, to the need of, or the need to, remove or minimise disadvantages suffered by persons who share a relevant protected characteristic. And you must encourage persons who share that relevant protected characteristic to participate in public life or in any other activity in which participation by such persons is disproportionately low. So what that means is that, we're talking about things like, sports, specific interest groups, spaces, as we all know, but this can also apply to religious affiliations whose limitations are also dictated by their sex class. These groups must be consulted if there is any suggestion of negative impact on their current rights. And how this is done is through an equality impact assessment, of which there is no evidence of one having been carried out in this situation. This, I believe, renders the process misleading and unlawful if it does not consult in full all the parties representing others with said protected characteristics. And this is even more curious a position because Wales doesn't have as much devolved power, as say Scotland. So how is it going to attempt to in their words, seek to devolve powers in relation to gender recognition. Does it mean that the Assembly is going to somehow attempt to override Westminster's position on self-ID? And more than that, challenge laws that supersede any regional or devolved law or policy? These are the Human Rights Act, the European Convention on Human Rights, the UN conventions in general, such as CEDAW, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. All of these deal in the protected characteristics of sex and religion, but not gender. Any change would have to be UK-wide because we can't change those policies on a regional basis because the human rights laws and the Equality Act override regional power. So this consultation should and must follow the current laws. Otherwise, it protected groups, women, LGBT groups, religious groups, pregnant women, for example, will suffer discrimination. So are they proposing to ask Westminster to remove Wales from the Equalities Act or change the devolution settlement? Would this have to be done through changing Government of Wales Act? I can't personally answer these. These are areas that obviously need to be questioned and explored, and neither can the plan. And we'll have to ask ourselves the question as to whether that's why they've been keeping the door shut on everybody that wants to ask these questions. Nor does it say how it will be implemented legally. So again, how is this going to go forward, basically? What is it they're trying to do, and what is it they're trying not to let us see or be a part of when they shut the door on our questions? So looking at the rights, in particular, what rights are being asked for and how is the government proposing to create these rights? The plan aims to, in their words, vocally defend and promote their rights and dignity to take, vocally defends those with the gender identity and promote their rights and dignity to take a full equal role in Welsh society, because trans people in Wales would like to see the Welsh government go above and beyond the actions of the UK government in protecting and furthering trans people rights. So here again, they want to separate themselves off from the UK and its position, the rest of England and its position. What they're not saying explicitly, yet looking for in this plan, is the right to self-ID under law as a human right to override sex and sexual orientation with gender identity. Trans and non-binary people have exactly the same human rights as everyone and may even share some of the additional protected characteristics, but unless we're talking gender reassignment, which is for the very few who have a certificate, gender identity and gender are not protected. The GRC creates a legal fiction to protect a tiny minority of people, but this cannot work as a legal definition. But this is what they're trying to push. And one of our Welsh councillors recently on social media let it slip, possibly accidentally, who knows, but he said, the right to self-identify as who they are without jumping through endless hoops, such as needing a medical diagnosis, having a medical report detailing their treatment and providing evidence of having lived in their acquired gender for a period of time. So this statement is clearly stating that they want to eliminate any gatekeeping with regards to individuals being able to change their gender, therefore their sex, because these have to be conflated in law, on their say-so. The result is a document that advocates for an environment where gender self-identification trumps the protected characteristics, even though there is no definition in law of these terms and could possibly even put us in breach of the human rights laws. So what's been done so far? As previously noted, organisations such as Marie-Josephe, LGBT Cymru, Lesbian Labour, amongst a few, have been active in challenging the plan. You can visit their websites to take a further look at what they've been doing. We will, if people can either just put their respective websites in the chat or we can do it later, please go and have a look at what they're doing to try and I don't know, get involved somehow, even though it's proving to be incredibly difficult to have a conversation with anybody, any of our Assembly members. What's been done so far? They've also organised a rally which took place last Tuesday, proved to be pretty successful. Around 150 people turned up at the Senedd, which is our parliament. It was the groups LGBT Alliance, Cymru, Marie Cymru, Lesbian Labour and Labour Women's Declaration that were there that mainly spoke, covering all sorts of, diverse backgrounds. The only assembly member to attend was a Conservative, Andrew R.T. Davies. No local press covered it, and this also makes, I don't know, for me, when only Conservative members seem to get involved in this issue, it feels like a forced fulfilling prophecy, because we find ourselves inadvertently allied with political opponents in so many other ways, and then we're accused of being right-wing fascists. What can be done? I've been having conversations with various people, and what we want to do and what we'll endeavour to do is try and explore the legal issues further and actually see whether there's grounds for judicial review, because on the face of it, it really does look like an illegal process. And what you can do, WHRC will be putting something up on the website regarding how you can submit concerns, because there's a closing date of the 22nd of October. Prior to that, you can submit your concerns to the Welsh Assembly. You don't have to be from Wales to get involved. The concerns can be about anything related to any impacts, but in particular concerns around protected spaces and safeguarding. We will put suggestions on the website, and you can take them, and you can either just copy and paste, or you can amend them accordingly. But we will email out some information once that goes live.
So we're now going to hear from Marian Rutigliano. She's from the USA, came of age and grew up in the early days of the second wave radical feminist. Every single radical feminist I've ever heard of, Marian has met and had a cup of tea with. And so every time I say, oh, did you meet so-and-so? She goes, oh, yeah, and has a story. So it's really fantastic, because she's been around a long time, knows lots and lots of interesting stories, and is going to tell us about experiences as a young lesbian in New York City in the 70s and beyond, and anything else. So over to you, Marian.
Hi. So this is going to be perhaps a little shorter, perhaps more than a stroll down memory lane, but not quite an intense radical feminist analysis. I came out in 1969. That was a big year. I mean, that was a very big year. A couple of big things happened in 1969, and I just I came out by, I was allowed to, I grew up in New York City, and I was allowed to go down into the city, the village, when I was 13. 13, and just happened to walk completely unwittingly into a meeting room full of daughters of Bilitis. We're just hanging out there, and saw one come in and kiss her girlfriend, and thought, oh, that's what I am. And that's how I came out. That was it. And it was, it was an incredible summer, obviously, Stonewall, Woodstock. I was just this kid. So all these women who created the second wave, who were writing all those books, either lived in the city permanently for a while, or they came through, they were guest lecturers, and they were very accessible, especially for just some young woman, me, who just didn't know you weren't supposed to go up to them. So I would talk to them. I mean, Kate Millett's giving a talk. I just hung around afterwards and would ask her about, the first feminist book I ever read was Sexual Politics, long before I had sex. So just asked her about it. All these women were around, and they were accessible. I don't know at the time that I was aware of kind of infighting or disagreements or things like that. I just absorbed it all, and I read all the books. And I found out as I got older, the drinking age at the time was 18. And it was hard to sneak into the bars any earlier than that, because it was already, difficult having a lesbian bar. A lot of them were run by organized crime, which actually I mean, there was a really weird relationship between lesbian bars and organized crime because these organized crime dudes would, would kind of keep things safe and pay off the cops and and be there to like for muscle, some guy named Knuckles, as protection if the police came around, or if guys came around like waiting outside afterwards when women came out. So I didn't get to go to the bars till I was older. There was some stuff for there were tea dances and things like that. But it was clear when I finally did get to the bars that men were trying to sneak their way in. Even then, the men we today call trans males or trans women, they were there, they were around. People were just like, they weren't around. Yeah, there were transsexuals. So there were the old school transsexuals, mostly gay men, but the forerunners, the protoplasm of the supposed trans women that we see today were around. They would sometimes they would try to come into the bars like after work, 6, 7 o'clock in a business suit and say, "Oh, I didn't know this was just a women's bar. Can't I just have a drink? I'm on my way home from work." And mostly they would get booted out because at the time you could still do that, and lesbian bartenders would boot them out, or they would come in at night when women were, when it was busy and it was dancing and drinking, and they'd come in and drag and try to get in. And again, most of the time they would be booted out because at the time you could do that and they had no recourse. The thing that mostly kept them away and in away from us and in the closet was that it was shame. It was really embarrassing for them to be seen like that. They could lose their jobs, they could lose their families. The kind of civil rights stuff that that shouldn't happen. But that's part of what kept them out. There would be social events where there might be, sometimes they'd be fundraisers, sometimes they'd just be dances, gay dances, and it might be mixed gay men and lesbians. And they would, these guys would be there trying to hit on the lesbians, and they would try to glom onto, the most feminine or, cute androgynous lesbian they could find. So this is the kind of stuff that was going on. This is what they, they were there. They were there. And there were, somebody's looking at the chat and somebody's talking about Scum Manifesto. I love that book. But there were a couple of very savvy lesbian bartenders and gay male drag queens who weren't quite so misogynist, who saw these guys, these forerunners of the men who have now completely decimated lesbian spaces. They saw them, and I remember hearing and being told, these guys, if they ever, if they're gonna ruin you. I mean, they're gonna sneak in. They're gonna ruin you. There is something really, really wrong with these guys. And when we'd be at these co-ed dances and stuff, and the gay male drag queens really hated the what we now call trans women. They hated them, and the trans women wanted no part of supposed trans women. Transvestites really wanted no part of the gay male drag queens because they weren't gay. I mean, they weren't gay then. We didn't have the word autogynephilia, but in retrospect, it was applicable. And like I said, they could still be kicked out of women's spaces. They didn't try to violate consciousness raising groups. They didn't try and violate other discussion groups at the time, besides bars. And this is, keep in mind, this is Manhattan. This is New York City, the West Village. This is like ground zero for lesbiana in the United States. Maybe along with San Francisco, but this was really a unique kind of almost a living social experiment of something that just had never been seen before. So there were bookstores, there were lesbian bookstores, like a lot of them, and they'd have meetings and discussion groups. And the transvestites, these guys wouldn't try to violate CR groups, conscious raising. They wouldn't go to the bookstore discussion groups. They weren't doing any of that. They just wanted to get into lesbian spaces. And if they'd be in a bar, they'd be like staring at us. You'd try to dance and they'd be just like staring at it. It was pretty disgusting. There were mitigating factors. There were things that made it better for us. Number one, this was what I sometimes call the age of androgyny. Butch femme had really been a thing for a long time partly because it was safe. A woman couldn't be seen wearing, certain, you had to wear so many, I think 3 articles of women's clothing or something. So they really had a pass as men to be in public at all. And, it was, butch femme was a thing, but by the 70s, everything was fairly androgynous. I'm not sure what that label really means or meant, because there still was, some variation in how women dressed and behaved, obviously for individuals, but there was no, the edges, the extremes of butch and femme were no longer there, and men hated it. They hated that. They absolutely hated it, and the transvestites, who we now call trans women, particularly hated it, because they had been, just so awful to the butch women, really just heavy-handed, just saying awful stuff, and now they push them into, mutilating, bodies and souls. But they were terrible to the butch women, and tried to, and they were really creepy and rapey like they are today to the femme women. But when we were all androgynous, the transvestites, they hated it. They absolutely hated it. They didn't know who to glom onto. There was who were they going to insult? Who were they going to, they didn't know. So they really, really hated it. And the other mitigating factor was private clubs. If someone had a business and had a large room in the back, or could even shut the windows in the front of the business, they would have a club with a lookout, and you would have to be a club member. It was very, you had to be vouched for, and if they didn't like you at the door, they wouldn't let you in. You had to know somebody, so you had to. It was, you could do this privately at the time, or in somebody had a large house and such. Economically, a lot of us don't have this anymore. People are in tiny apartments with lots of roommates sometimes. I don't know that anybody really has lots of businesses anymore with big open spaces, but that would be something if people wanted to help, is to find the legislative and legal foundations for keeping or supporting private freedom of association. Can we do this? What can we do anymore legally? What can we do to exclude? And exclusion meaning healthy boundaries. And if someone has like private spaces for meeting, whether it's a private, America is in particular basically worships private property. So if there's a private space, you generally are allowed to just tell people, no, you can't come here, it's trespassing, as long as you don't advertise it publicly. So that's what I remember growing up with, and you'd meet all these fantastic women. I didn't know that I thought she was old at the time, but I didn't know that this old Black woman that I went up to and started asking about racism one day was Audre Lorde. I didn't know. So that they were all there, and they would speak freely to you. The word radical means root, and it's a mathematical term. When you do a square root, the thing under the square root sign is the radical, and it means getting to the root of things. So.
Yeah, now I've just found actually this what we had in the introduction. It's saying we'd like to help women understand radical feminist analysis based on the work of the women who created it. So yes, your point about radical meaning root. Will you explain that?
Someone explained it to me, a woman whose name I forget, but she said, if you want that it was almost like back engineering, that if you wanted to know how something works, it's like, this happens. Okay, well, why does this happen? What things came before a woman choosing prostitution? What things came before a man, choosing pornography and the woman choosing to be in pornography? Was it really a choice? What happened before the prostitution, before the pornography? What happened before the woman got married? What happened before? And everything that you could say is, well, before this happened, a woman was in poverty, or a man was taught this. And if you kept going, what happened before that? What happened before that? You go back to when you're born, and you're born either male or female. And the root of it all is the first thing that happens in any of our lives. We are either born male or female. And if you're born male or female, that means that you get placed into one class of people or another class of people simply based on the fact that you were born either male or female. And then everything that comes after that, everything, starting from the time you're born, is because you are in one of those classes or another. And knowing that women are in the oppressed class and men are in the oppressor class doesn't start when we're all 21 years old. It doesn't start when we're 18. It starts when we are born.
So Marian, I also think, you might have said this, but I didn't hear, but that a nice thing, or a thing I like about the word radical, is that it is asking for change. It's a bit more extreme than just saying we just need to change things a tiny weeny bit. Radical has always seemed to me to be saying we want a lot of change. But radis, I think a lot of women here will know that it's comes from root, which so that's what Marian's saying, is radical means the root of things. Would you say you're a radical feminist, Marian?
Yeah, radical doesn't mean extreme, like you said, and somebody said,
right.
Yeah, that's what you just said. It doesn't mean extreme.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, fair enough.
And somebody says T. Grace claims to have invented the term radical feminism. She may have. She's the first person I ever heard use that term. But it was around, so I don't know. I used to follow her around like a puppy. She would talk someplace, and she was brilliant. So she was one of the first women that I ever heard say that. And in the chat, someone is also talking about T. Grace naming men as the agents of our oppression. Mary Daly talks around that also, is the courage to name. That patriarchy is the land and the domain of men. But yeah, I'd call myself a radical feminist because I walked into a room of lesbians and started reading books, and that's how I understand things. Everything that I come up with as an opinion is because I start at the beginning and follow it through and see how we got to where we are. It's not like I don't like that you're doing that. And when so-called liberal feminism came around, it just seemed like an odd thing to do, to say that you had a choice about something with no reference to the conditions under which you made those choices. If I am, if I'm in a, I always use the analogy of a POW camp, but if I'm in a prisoner of war camp, or if I'm enslaved, every choice I make is in the context of being in a prisoner of war camp or being, enslaved.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good, and it's very clear. You mentioned Valerie Solanis's book, The Scum Manifesto. Did you ever meet her?
No, I never did. I never met.
Did she hang out in the lesbian bars, or like?
Oh, well, yeah. As soon as I got old enough to be, of course, yeah. We all. Let me qualify that as I met my partner when I was 18, so I didn't go in there to date. We went in there to dance and socialize and and drink. But oh yeah, of course. And I feel so bad for young lesbians now, because we tell them and how many lesbian bars there were. Now, again, this is in context, New York City, Manhattan, at the height of the 70s, in the West Village. But, even by 10 years later, you could go to the counties in New Jersey and Long Island and north of New York, Nassau County, Long Island. If you were there in the early 80s or through the mid 80s, there were 4, 5, or 6 lesbian bars within 15, 20 minutes driving of wherever you lived. And that was extraordinary. That was really extraordinary.
One of the things, I went to New York, I think in the late 80s, and it went to and the 90s, and went to lesbian bars, and it was great. And then I also went to California, to San Francisco, and me and my friends, we went to see some women who were all living in the hills in Berkeley or somewhere like that. And it basically looked like the whole of the lesbian community were all living in really nice little leafy suburbs in the hills around San Francisco. And they were all trying to have babies. and they were not very political. And I think,
No.
I mean, that's a problem recently, isn't it? That loads of women, as society's got less aggressive towards lesbians, loads of lesbians have moved to the leafy suburbs, and they're not concentrated in those city centres.
We thought what we had, we took it for granted, and we thought it would be there forever. And we left to go pursue careers, and, you know, and domestic life, free of, you know, walking out and just being beat up because we were lesbians, and we abandoned it. And I feel really bad for young lesbians that we did abandon it, and, you know, had babies and I mean, it's having babies and having careers. I mean, that's all fine. But we did not keep up the community that we somehow thought would always be there.
We're going to go now to France and hear from Marie-Josephe de Villers. She's Vice President of CQFD, Lesbian Feminists France, and also ICASM, International Coalition for the Abolition of Surrogate Motherhood, and also a member of NOUES, WHRC France, and is going to talk to us about a range of different things. So thank you so much.
What's new in France and in the country where I live in? We are now facing something very, very nasty, very dangerous. We have a draft law aiming at banning the so-called conversion therapy, which in fact is nothing but therapy. In our French penal code, there are already provisions to condemn these practices concerning homosexuality, but there they also address gender identity. Thanks to our Canadian friends, we know exactly what they are up to, as this type of law is already in force in Canada. They are going to ban any exploratory therapies in favor of affirmative therapy, which do not investigate in the reasons of the suffering of minors in gender dysphoria. We are also facing an attempt to set up a parliament's position on the transgender issue. This position is in line with the Yogyakarta principles. It says that a simple affidavit or sworn statement will allow anybody to change one's civil status. This position also requires education, health, jobs, prisons to be trans-inclusive. How are we going to deal with that? We started campaigning in July towards national and local people, writing letters, sending them informations, asking to meet them or to be heard in the parliament. So far, we met with one woman MP who is on our line, but she doesn't know nothing on this issue. She said that, and she was very happy to meet us to know more about that, because she felt she didn't agree with it, but she had no arguments. Also, one of us managed to change a local MP's mind. He withdrew his support to the motion, which is quite great. What else are we doing as a new FEMME group contact of WHRC in France? Here you have our action teams that we have set up. We have action towards public opinion, writing articles, designing short videos and podcasts on peak trans. We have action to increase the WHRC front, organizing the French-speaking webinars. We have action to support our members, our own members, providing them with lawyers counseling in case of harassment. And also we are planning to organize a support group. And also we have action towards political peoples, as I said. And of course, we are supporting the French lesbian group called Resistance Lesbian that you might have heard of. About the Zoom, the French-speaking webinars that we organize once a month. Here are the previous ones. They are all available on the WHRC YouTube channel on the playlist, which is mentioned down there. The first one was on the declaration, of course. The second on the laws on gender identity in France, Switzerland, Andorra, Quebec. The third on 5 lesbian organizations being under attack for their position on gender identity. They are Le Sel in Marseille, 44 Vilaines Filles in Nantes, Arci Lesbica also in Italy, Bagdam Lesbian Space in Toulouse, and El Tour in Belgium. The first was on detransition with Post-Trans, Belgium, and Detrans, Canada. The last one was so interesting with Valérie Pelletier. She's from Canada, from Quebec, and she was fired for a position on gender identity. And this position, the position she took them outside of her job, but she was fired. She's now filing a case against employer. And here, down there are the new topics that we're going to deal with. And to conclude, here what we have learned so far. We think that drafting principles to counter Yogyakarta principles would be of great help. It would be complementary to the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. For example, in the draft law I mentioned, they quoted the Yogyakarta principle. We would be able, if we had our own principle, we would have been able to say, if you quote the Yogyakarta principle, you have to quote also our principles. We also think that it would be at one point important to create a special fund to defend those who are attacked like Valérie Pelletier. Thanks for your attention.